This afternoon's hobby enhancement is a milk drink, apparently. Time for another fleet showcase. This time the British. When I got into Victory at Sea the second time around, I played a bit of first edition. I knew I wanted the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Royal Navy. Now I knew about the Japanese Navy from the first edition. I fielded a nice big fleet in that. But I didn't really know anything about the British, except that, Royal Britannia, and I thought that would be a good idea. But the US came along because I bought the starter box and got some Japanese and US, and I figured, why waste a perfectly good fleet when you can build on it. And then meanwhile, various friends of mine turned up with different fleets, like Andrew got some of the US, then he got the Kriegsmarine because he prefers them to the US, mostly because he doesn't like fighting the Japanese. And Emilio went and got the Regia Marina, or whatever the hell it's called. And another friend of ours got some Japanese, so I had some fun against those. But I still wanted to do the British, so I went and got a British fleet, which also works well for fighting against the Italians and the Germans, much better than the US fleet or the Japanese fleet, although there are some nice counterfactual histories of what might have happened mid to late war after the Italians changed size. Apparently they wanted to go fight in the Pacific, but they weren't allowed to. All my games of Axis and Allies online, where I seem to invade the Mediterranean with a Japanese fleet every once in a while. So my experience so far has been that the US are the easiest fleet to play. They're by far the most reliable, with the exception of the torpedoes. The Imperial Japanese Navy are a bit more of a glass cannon, which makes them a great deal of fun. They fly about like they're in Ferraris, clocking long lance torpedoes at everybody and then fall apart if you're looking funny. Kriegsmarine and Regia Marina, in my experience, are both very formidable in a very modern and sort of boutique kind of way. Their capital ships have got crazy good range bands on their guns, and that makes a huge difference. And those German destroyers are a bit of a nightmare. But of all the fleets that I've played or fought against, the Royal Navy, these are the ones that have the hardest time getting to actually work. So we've played a bunch more games than the ones we've filmed. You might have seen some of the other ones on the channel that we filmed. If you haven't done, please go ahead and have a look. So there's a few games with the British, different results. I've not played enough of this game to be an expert or anything like that, but I've had enough of a go to have some opinions, and I thought I might share those with you today. First, I'll give you a quick run through what actually came in the box. So we start with the King George battleship. That's this bad boy. Very modern ship, 600 points, worth every penny. Does what it says on the can. Really great armor, really good guns. Although apparently in real life they're a little bit finicky. And not very fast, but you know what? With that sort of range and that sort of armor, you don't really need to be. Then we got, where is it? The Lender class cruiser. Now the Lender class is, this is where I have trouble with the English fleet. So the problems are one of the cruisers. The Lender class, okay, it's got fast track guns, I think, from memory. Right, yeah, twin linked and fast track. There's actually not many dice, and a reroll's not the same as getting 2 dice. So it's good for taking out destroyers because it's fast tracked, and it's one of few things that will be able to take on the super fast destroyers that you get like in the Japanese Navy if the things actually get close enough. but yeah, still not a lot of dice. Then we get the Edinburgh, which is a bit more conventional in that it's got a few more hull points and it's got a few more dice of shooting. Probably the most conventional one out of the three that come in the starter box. And then we've got the Dido class, which is meant to be a dedicated AA cruiser, but to be honest, it's piss weak. It's got fuck all hull points. It really is a light cruiser. And it's got very few dice of anything much, including AA, so I don't know how it's a dedicated AA cruiser. It's not even fast-tracked on the guns. So, well, I think they're light guns, so they don't specifically have to be fast-tracked in order to hit a destroyer up close, but even so. And all of these have torpedoes. Now, torpedoes on destroyers is fine because they move really quick. They're hard to pick off with most gunnery. Then it doesn't matter so much if they get destroyed because they're a lot less points. And that you'll just have to throw more dice at them to actually do anything. But on a cruiser, it's basically it's a gun magnet. Everything hurts a cruiser. And it doesn't have the additional -1 to hit for being a destroyer. So how the hell you get close enough to actually use your torpedoes effectively is beyond me, especially when you've got capital ships on the table. And I don't know, it's probably there's quite a few points in torpedoes, even when it's just, a couple of decks of one shots. Then we move to the tribal class destroyers. Now these actually aren't bad. They're 35 points each. They look cool. They've got a couple of racks of one-shot torpedoes, 4 dice to try and hit with. And they can do all the clever things you want destroyers for example, screening your fleet with smoke and being a nuisance with things like recce and having something cheap to put down in order to control the deployment phase, keep your opponent guessing. I like these things, they're great, I take them every time. They're quick, so they're hard to hit. I think that really speaks to one of the issues with this game is if you're not playing scenarios which are arbitrarily balanced, or not, but based on the scenario, then cruisers feel this middle ground where in the real world you have cruisers because they sustain at sea, they can travel a long distance, they can take on weather which a destroyer struggles with, and they can have resources on board that can do useful things, whereas a destroyer struggles with a lot of that. But in the gameplay, a cruiser is min-max tends to help win games in any sort of gameplay, but a cruiser, while it can soak up more damage, it can't soak up that much more damage, and it's pretty easy to inflict damage on a cruiser. So it's the difference between real world logistics of running an empire and a functional navy versus what will hock the right dice when you want them during the game. Right, so the other thing that comes in the box is the Eagle class. It's a escort carrier. I used to hate the Eagle, but I'm actually starting to think that I was using it wrong. See, when you get the starter box, you get the Eagle class, and then you get the Swordfish over there as the ship, the planes it's carrying. But the Swordfish are crap. But then I figured out that if you're playing from about 42 onwards, you can take Supermarine Spitfires, which are 25 points each, and you get 5 flights, which is crap for any sort of carrier. But those 5 flights of Supermarine Spitfires is 125 points worth of plane that you can get for 110 points worth of ship. The other thing is it's got torpedo belts, and it's got roughly the same hull points as Ark Royal, which carries a more respectable 15 flights. So I think there is a space for the Eagle, and also it might be fieldable if we're doing convoy missions, because we've got some cargo ship models from that box set, and Emilio's got submarines, and we've really got to put them to use at some point, do a dedicated mission. So maybe the Eagle will get to escort something through the Med, as was once the case. And apparently the Eagle survived the war, which is impressive. So that's basically what you get. You get all of those ships, and then you get the ferry swordfish. And I hate this ferry swordfish. They go something absurd like 10 inches a turn, which is nothing, and they're torpedo bombers, so they usually miss. Pretty hopeless in a dogfight, of course. But that's what you get in the way of dedicated attack, which naturally encourages you to upgrade your fleet. So I did upgrade. I got, because by the time I upgraded the fleet, I knew that we needed proper carriers. Because this game really works best with all domains, including air power. Otherwise, you can find yourself on the wrong end of some nastiness and lose the game. So we got Ark Royal, which unfortunately did not survive the war. Didn't actually last that long, but it's a good dedicated carrier. It's got the right number of hull points, no armor, of course, but enough light guns to cause a nuisance to destroyers that come and bother you, and it carries 15 flights, which is pretty respectable. And I've got the planes. This is what came in the boxes, right? I've got Hurricanes, because that's what was on offer, and Fulmars. And Fulmars are, they were actually used as, well, there's a bomber version and a fighter version. They're both pretty average, I have to say. In fact they're rat shit. Let's be honest, I don't actually use them as what they say on the base. On the rare occasion I'll take things, I'll take Supermarines, Spitfires, particularly if we're fighting from 42 onwards, because those Spitfires rock. They are really good air superiority fighters. Yeah, so the air wing of the Royal Navy is a bit iffy in what I've bought, but there are better things out there that you can take if you want to go all tournament. And the last additional ship that I got was the Admiralty class battleship, which is actually relegated to battle cruiser status by this point in the war. There's some background noise because my kids decided to shuffle in his puffy jacket and have a look at what I'm filming. So yeah, the Admiralty class battleship. It's an old World War I ship. It's actually the Hood. So it's been relegated to battle cruiser because it just doesn't have the armor to keep up with the modern ships. It's got armor 5+ instead of the 6, which is common, or the 7 that the King George has, which makes that a beast. The Hood's actually got more hull points than the King George, interestingly. But the guns don't have quite the range. They're old guns. And she'll just cop it. The bottom line is, if you're going to take the Hood, it's going to die. You just got to get used to it. But you can use it for that specific scenario in which it historically dies and always seems to die every time somebody plays the scenario. And you field it because it's the Hood, and the Hood is cool. And you don't play miniature rule games unless you like the rule of cool. So yeah, it's also fun just to stick it in there for a bit of a mix. I mean, the Hood's what, 395 points, which I think is probably a bit overkill. I think the algorithm went a bit silly with the size of the ship, forgetting that this thing's going to sink from critical hits long before it runs out of hull points. But yeah, it's still a great ship. Right, so I find the Royal Navy to be an odd fleet for two main reasons, and you may well disagree. The first is because the ferry swordfish are crap. The British options for dive bombing and torpedo bombing are not very good. And those ferry swordfish, they're really only good for picking on ships that have previously damaged and isolated, so they don't have air cover, so you can knock them off. Or anything that's anchored at harbour, I suppose. And the cruisers are weird. Like I was saying before, torpedoes on a cruiser, it's just... I'm spoiled because I've been playing the Japanese where the long-lance torpedoes are freaking horrific, and the Americans that don't even bother putting torpedoes on their cruisers, and I think they got it right. They just put more guns on there instead. And the British cruisers just don't have enough guns. So they're basically the soft target in an otherwise quite effective fleet. And the starter box seems to have a number of things that are just there for character, really. And I think it speaks to the situation the UK was in at the start of the war. So on the one hand, they were colonial, so they needed ships that could travel the world. So they needed a big investment in cruisers. They needed something which was powerful enough to deal with localized issues. Enough troops, enough guns, enough whatever. Enough ability to put out recce planes and drop out little boats. The Royal Navy was old. The British Navy was old. It had a lot of legacy ships and they're keeping the hulls in service. It was cashed up. The Navy got the lion's share of the money over the Army. So they would do a lot of different designs. I think some of the efficiency that other navies had to try and engage in was probably not such a priority for the British. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. And the British were restricted by the Washington Treaty, whereas some countries cheated more than others. So the fleet ends up being this hodgepodge of, let's get that angle there, ends up being this hodgepodge of stuff made for reasons other than for efficient and effective line battles on a tabletop. And I think you sort of see this a little bit in how the Navy went about some aspects of the war. You got a lot of weird ships that are struggling to keep up with modern ammunition, modern range of gunnery. Everyone's struggling with the dominance of air in the new era. Makes it a really interesting fleet. It's a bit more interesting than the Americans in that regard. But a couple of quick notes on the ships. I talked before about the Eagle class. You take 5 flights of planes, which collectively cost more than the cost of the ship. It actually makes taking the Eagle worthwhile. Sometimes you're playing a big game, it's worth having a second carrier just to have one less liability, all your eggs in one basket. I think that if I drive the thing directly toward the enemy and start throwing lots of little shots out, it might annoy them enough to shoot the thing, because it's got lots of hull points and torpedo belts, so it might soak up some fire that otherwise might go somewhere more useful. So ablative carrier maybe, I'm not sure if that's really a thing. Then you got the hood. Where's the hood? Let's zoom in on the hood. There she is. It's actually longer than any other ship. That thing's huge. Lots of hull points, but guns are short range, armor is 5+. They had planned upgrades for this ship, which I think were going to improve the gunnery amongst other things and give it an armoured deck. It doesn't actually have an armoured deck. But the fact is, just about everything modern outclasses it, so the only reason to take it is to look good. One thing with this game that we haven't really explored as much in my gaming group, because we tend to game after a few drinks on a Friday night when we're all tired and we don't have a lot of time to play with. But this game really rewards scenario play. Choosing to restrict your fleet so there's no battleships, for example, or no air cover today, or whatever it is you do to mix it up. If you just do the same sort of roll off a couple of mission scenario types, the general matched ones, and have at it, then it tends to lend to the same sort of fleet configuration. Emilio bringing the 2 battleships every time, the same carrier deployments, all that sort of nonsense. But I think the cruisers that are included in the rules, while they're not great for tournament play, in the real world, cruisers did a hell of a lot. There's a lot of them. They're all over the world doing, commerce raids, or trying to find the ships doing commerce raids, and leading destroyer groups because of their ability to sustain at sea and so on. So whilst I've got my grievances about trying to use them effectively, a Friday evening battle, they can be really interesting in games which are designed to facilitate getting cruisers in amongst the action. Right, now in other news, just before I did this video, Warlord announced a new World War II campaign. So I'm trying to get some new friends, some of my gaming group who don't play this game, to play it for a start. I've got 3 fleets, so I'm hoping that some of them will come on board to give this campaign a go. maybe borrow a fleet or two. And if that works, I will post something. Otherwise, we'll try and get some more games in, or film them at least. I hope you enjoyed this showcase. Feel free to hit like, subscribe, comment, tell me where I got my opinions incorrect or any glaring obvious things that should be mentioned that I didn't bother to think of. And I think it's time to call it a day.